Mass immigration, also known as the UN Replacement Migration Agenda, is a decades-long plan, and the aim of the plan is in the name: replacement. Governments and media have long demonised anyone who dares to say it how it is, that the identity of the national people across the West is being replaced with third world, often savagely violent migrants who do not share the values of the people of that nation. And the trend is the same across the West. The migrants flood in, whether legally or illegally, commit heinous crimes. The government goes light on those criminals, often releasing them back into the community whilst simultaneously slandering and even punishing the citizens of those countries who voice their concerns, protest against this ripping apart of their nations, or display any sign of nationalism or desire to preserve the integrity of their countries. But that tide is shifting. We are seeing a prolonged campaign of anti-immigration protests in the UK. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of Australians gathered for the same purpose, and Japan is also joining the battle. Take a look. Now, a lesser known fact about what's happening in Japan, which, by the way, that footage took a lot of people by surprise, garnering millions of views on social media. People just weren't aware that Japan was having the same issues. Migrant protests shake Japan after country sets up hometowns for African partners. Take a listen to this. Migrant protests have erupted in Japan after hometowns for 4 African countries were set up in Japanese cities. Controversy was sparked last week after authorities announced a new initiative under the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, who describes its goal as creating a, quote, peaceful and prosperous world where people can hope for a better future and explore their diverse potentials. At the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, JICA announced the rollout of an African Hometown Initiative, which declared 4 hometowns in Japanese cities for Nigeria, Ghana, Tanzania, and Mozambique. Officials in the city of Imabari, the site of the new hometown for Mozambique, revealed to public broadcaster NHK that they've received thousands of phone calls and emails of concern about the program. Similarly, in Australia, over the weekend, protests broke out across capital cities, protesting the mass immigration policies of the current government. Now, many employees of the Australian government have, of course, condemned the protesters, calling them all Nazis and slapping various other labels on concerned Australians who are sick and tired of lawlessness on their streets. As we reported to you recently, there have been a string of violent machete crimes by migrants, and in response, the government has cracked down on law-abiding citizens owning any weapons to be able to defend themselves, and also banned knives and put out machete disposal bins so that the criminals, who will apparently come to the realization that attacking someone with a machete is in fact frowned upon, have somewhere to safely return the weapons they're using to terrorize Australians. We're talking literally a bin with a slot around about the size of a machete. Just the other day, a Pakistani student who killed a disabled grandma in a crash in Australia was spared jail after a court heard she wants to sponsor her family to migrate to Australia. Quote, "I do not consider the present matter ought to negatively affect your career and migration goals," the magistrate said. And just like Japan, it's been revealed now that the Australian government is planning a whole bunch of new housing, likely for foreigners, in the middle of a housing crisis. Former politician Craig Kelly says New Calcutta, a new million-home city coming to Australia soon. Let's just scroll down to the announcement. India in talks to construct 1 million houses worth $500 billion in Australia, from Piyush Goyal. He says, "I am in deep negotiation with my counterpart in Australia to create 1 million homes. 1 million homes. Anybody wants to do the maths? 1 million homes in Australia would be at least 500 billion USD opportunity, Goyal said while speaking in Mumbai. And apparently they're seeking assistance from the UAE for the project. No doubt this housing will be for foreigners, or at bare minimum to satisfy the housing demand put on the country by this massive influx of immigrants, as more and more Australians are sleeping in tents due to the lack of housing. Sometimes these tents or trailers or caravans maybe on a parent's or relative's property, so the government made that illegal too. Better to have Australians on the streets than allow them to stay in a caravan or trailer on an acreage, the government says. So naturally, this issue affects a broad range of Australians. Over the weekend, people from all walks of life, as you saw in those videos, attended the protests across the capital cities. And some of those people were immigrants themselves who came to the country with the desire to assimilate and can see the hordes coming in now do not have that desire. Some of them were veterans. Some of them were everyday Aussie families. And an extremely small percentage of those people were, quote, self-proclaimed Nazis. So, of course, the government is focusing, and even some of these so-called dissident media spent their time focusing, on the small group rather than the tens and tens of thousands of people that attended that were united in their demands and mass immigration. Opposition leader Susan Ley is one of those people who is not making any sense at all. She said Australia's way of life is built on respect, on community, and on the belief that every person deserves to feel safe, valued, and at home here. We are a migrant nation. Our strength has been forged by generations of people who chose this country, worked hard, and came together around the values of fairness, tolerance, respect, and reward for effort. Listen to this pivot here. That strength is now being tested. Since Hamas's barbarism on October 7th, new pressures have been placed on our social cohesion, and there have been multiple failures of government. So she then says basically that these protests are happening because of Hamas? So Australian families are living on the streets. They can't afford their groceries. They're being attacked in public and in their homes by savages with machetes. The government continues to let immigrant criminals off the hook so as to not impede their migration goals. And the government is blaming Hamas. And to top it off, the New South Wales Premier Chris Minns is going to investigate to see if any of these Aussie patriots are guilty of hate speech. Take a listen.
Having spoken to the police this morning, they're investigating, as they would in all circumstances, the speeches that were made. Yes, you've got a right to free speech, yes, but other people have got a right to be free from racism and vilification in our modern society, and we've got a duty to protect that.
Now, Australia is an example of a worldwide crisis of mass immigration, and the government cracking down on the established citizens while protecting the feelings of the machete killers, we guess. Over the last few years, we've seen countless reports of residential home builders in Australia, both large and small, many of them having been in business building great homes for Australians for decades, literally go broke, shut the doors and drift into oblivion due to multiple factors, one of them being the economic crisis created by governments in response to COVID. So now some Indian Union minister who can't speak English properly from India is going to build Australian houses instead, probably for foreigners. It seems to be the norm that many, if not all of these people in the Australian government serving as ministers have zero experience throughout their entire lives regarding the portfolios that they manage. So too with the housing minister, and thus they've had a housing crisis for the last 5 prime ministerial governments as well as mass immigration. These people who are running the country quite literally have no idea what they're doing. Their solution to the housing and economic crisis is to bring more skilled immigrants in, thus exacerbating the very issue they claim to be working towards solving. And in response to those who protest and say this is unsustainable, lock them up for hate speech or blame Hamas or Nazis. Take your pick of any scapegoat available rather than too many migrants and no assimilation. Immigration affects many facets of society. It will affect economic factors, obviously housing as we've discussed, job opportunities, and not to mention the safety of the citizens. Many people from other countries simply do not share traditional Western values, which is the key here. The reason these governments are retaliating towards the people is because they clearly have a desire to dismantle traditional Western values. What we are witnessing here is quite literally the decline of Western civilization worldwide. This could be seen as nothing less than intentional at this point. The people need to make their voices heard, not allow distractions from the message, and force politicians to bend to the will of the people.